Hello. So, in earlier videos, you may remember me having discussed that I didn't have a set structure for how I wanted to present these videos. Over the last few months, I have gone through this structure, which I'll take you through now, that has been more or less field tested amongst my other students, and it seems to work pretty well. So, what I've done is kind of done my best to devise a way that I have been able to use the many levels that people find themselves when learning the Hebrew, that I can take essentially my one-room schoolhouse and be able to meet people at several different levels of having learned the Hebrew. So for all that we're going to cover in this video, it may seem like quite a bit of a jump from what you may be used to, but I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by anything we go over, especially when it comes to the grammar questions that we have down here, because you'll find that even if you don't necessarily remember what the second person perfect tense is in English, we will be going over those things, so don't get completely freaked out by how that may seem to go over your head initially, because I do want to make sure that I present these in a way that is clear and that you can actually retain what you've learned. But if you feel like it is going over your head, don't worry about it. Focus on what you can and what does make sense to you at this point, because later on down the road, what is more basic in this video will seem like second nature to you after you've gone through it enough and learned enough Hebrew, that some of the harder parts of the grammar and different things that come into play in the higher levels, if you will start to be something that you are more comfortable with and more ready to learn at a later period of time. So until then, just take it for what it is. Go ahead, feel free to ignore it, or if you need to watch the video multiple times to actually get it in your head, that's completely fine. I just want to be able to present this in a way that pretty much anybody at any level can sit down and learn a selection from the Torah, which one that may be that I'm going over in a certain video, this one being the Vahavtah, that you could go to those videos and learn that section thoroughly, that you can then use that information when you're looking at other portions of Torah, but that if you just want to know the Vahavtah after these videos are finished, you're going to know it in and out. So here we go with part one of the Vahavtah. What we're going to do initially is just read the sentence. A lot of this is going to be reading practice that I would like you to maybe at this point go ahead and pause the video, try reading it yourself, see how you do, and then as I read through it, check yourself against what I've read. So I'll read through it now, and then I'll explain what I've read, and then we'll move on to some vocabulary. So first of all, just reading. Vahavtah et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvchol nafshecha uvchol meodecha. Okay? A few things that I want to point out here. First of all, the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. That is the four-letter name of God, and I want you to be clear on knowing that even though here there are vowel markers, it is better that you don't read it. Though some people do try to pronounce the name of God, some others do find that offensive. And whatever school you may be in, it really is more appropriate to default to being gracious towards those who may be offended. And in that case, there are two substitutions for what you would say when reading the name of God. When you see the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh appear as it is here, you would substitute the word Adonai, which means Lord, or Hashem, which means the name. Both are fully appropriate and describe exactly what's going on here, and they also lend a little bit of leeway to those to say, if you're in a group of mixed company and you're not positive if someone might be offended by the use of what people say, the name of God, how it's pronounced, it's always a little bit easier and just safer, more gracious, more kind to default to using Lord or Hashem, Adonai, which means Lord, or Hashem, which means the name, as a substitution for that. I use Adonai mostly out of a form of habit, partially also because when I speak of him, I like to speak of God as my Lord. I love that title. The next thing here, what we have is Elohecha. You may remember me talking about in other videos about what I called a ghost Vav. So much to say that if you have the Vav being this letter here, and if it had a dot on top of it, that would be the Cholam Vav to say the O sound. There are many words where putting that Vav in there is really superfluous. And what they do as a substitution for there being no Vav, but still wanting you to be able to see that the O vowel is being pronounced here, when they put the vowel markers in, you'll see the little dot between the two consonants that carry the Vav sound. So it becomes Elohecha. Okay? The other funky thing happening is right here with the Segol and the Shiva. If you were going by the Ashkenaz pronunciation, there are instances where this is pronounced a little bit differently. I go by the Sephardic pronunciation, so I'm not going to go over what those are because I'm not entirely sure. Know that there is a different way to pronounce them, and if you come across an Ashkenazic rabbi or someone who is learning that form of pronunciation of the Hebrew, go ahead and find a teacher that can explain what those different pronunciations are. But for now, when the Sephardic pronunciation is coming through, just know that Shiva doesn't really make a sound, and it really doesn't anywhere else, so it makes it a little bit easier in this translation. That for the Segol, the is the only sound that's coming through underneath this aleph. So, Elohecha. Okay? The only other part that I want to point out here is in Nafshecha. The two Shiva vowel markers underneath the Fe and the Shin consonants, what it's doing in this first syllable is to stop that syllabic sound. Naf. One syllable. Second syllable is not going to have an ah or o or oo vowel sound. It's just going to pronounce that beginning sound of the consonant to say sh. Naf shecha. Okay? So let's read it one more time going through those. Vahavtah et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha. Sound good? Fantastic. In these worksheets, the second step that we'll cover is the vocabulary, which I've included on the side here. What I've done is I've pulled the main vocab words out of each of the sentences as we go through them. This one only has 4. As we go through other portions of Torah, you'll find that there are as many as 8 or 9 vocabulary words that should be pulled. For each of these, what I suggest is that you would make separate cards, flashcards, that have each of these terms on them, and drill yourself on these terms and make them part of your vocabulary. They are words which you will see very often and are fantastic words to know and have them be right at the front of your vocabulary to be able to use as you go through more translations of Torah. So I'll go ahead and define these for you as we go through, and you can make flashcards out of them. Ahav, all of these, I'll just add this as a side note, all of these are in their root form. So when you see them in the sentence, there are a lot of other grammatical things going on. Over here, they're in their root form so that you can drill on them as what the individual word is, rather than having to focus on when they're being conjugated within the sentence. So ahav is the verb to love. Levav is heart. Nefesh is soul. And me'od is one of my absolute favorite words in Hebrew. When you look it up in a Strong's Concordance, you will see it defined as exceeding. A fun one, muchness. It is here translated as strength. Sometimes in this verse you'll see it as resources. It all kind of depends on the context of the sentence. In this case, once you have loved the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, me'od is a lovely way of saying, and everything else. So that once you have given God your heart and soul, you still have all of these other bits and pieces of your being with which you can love him. And one of the most fantastic translations I've actually heard, heard a fantastic teaching on me'od within this context to say that it could be translated as your best. That you would love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your best. Because what happens when you have no strength? What happens when you have no resources? God only asks of you your best. Now what we'll do is we'll start to go over what these grammatical questions are at the bottom. And this is where we're going to start to break down and translate the sentence a bit more. First of all, number 1, which word is the direct object marker? We're going to talk a little bit about the grammar here. First of all, in English, to point out what this is, because Hebrew has something which is not directly translated into the English. It doesn't exist in our language. So, a direct object is the thing which receives the action of a sentence. Okay? So, if we were to use this sentence itself as a translation, we'll say that you are to love the Lord. Okay? So our verb here is love, and the direct object, what is receiving the action, receiving the love, is the Lord. In Hebrew, one thing that we do not have is et. Et signifies that the Lord is the one being loved. So as this is the verb, the direct object, et, is the direct object marker. So you can go ahead and put that in here as the answer to number 1, the Aleph Tav. Okay? Question number 2. Which suffix is the second person perfect tense? Don't get all thrown off by what these grammatical terms are. I put them in there for the sake of those who care. For those of you who don't, know that second person is you, perfect tense is shall, and the suffix appears at the end of a word. So in English it would be ed, ing, all those things that are added to modify the word itself. So in Hebrew, there's a 1-letter suffix, which means you shall. In this case, it is the tav. You shall. Okay? So we'll put that here, tav. Now, which suffix is the second person masculine possessive your? Okay, so second person, you, when speaking to a man or a mixed crowd of both men and women, you would default to the masculine form. And then possessive, to not say that it's you, but it's yours. So, second person masculine possessive is your. In this case, it becomes cha, Elohecha, your God. So we'll go ahead and write that in. Question number 4. Which prefix is the preposition in or with? So if a suffix ends a word, a prefix begins a word, starts at the front of it. So in this case, there's one letter at the beginning of a word can mean in or with. Usually these are interchangeable. Sometimes it's really just dependent on the context of the sentence for you to decide which is appropriate within the translation. In this case, it is going to be with, but the prefix itself that can mean either is the bet. So, in, with, and is with in this case. Now, number 5, which prefix is the conjugation and? So this letter, when it appears at the beginning of a word, can mean and that is the Vav. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and we'll break down the whole sentence in a full translation using the vocabulary that we have over here and using the grammatical terms that we have here. We're going to go through and break down the full sentence. The way I do this is to draw my lines between the different parts of the word itself. So you'll have ahav, which is to love, and you shall love, vahavtah. Okay? Et, we'll just put D period O period to show that it is the direct object marker. So you shall love what? The Lord, your, and then Elohim being God. Your, again, is the answer to number 3, which suffix at the end of a sentence is the second person, you, masculine, speaking to a male or a mixed multitude, possessive, your, cha, your God. We then have bechol, which is in this case, with. Chal is all. That's a fun one. It's a little easier to remember because of the rhyme. Whoops. I started to break off the lamed. Now, okay, I'll go ahead and explain my mistake, what I did in my head there. The lamed at times can be 2 or 4. However, in this case, because it is part of the root levav, even though it has this shiva here, which was my first sign to say, oh, that's a prefix meaning 2 or 4, but it's not. It's part of the root word to say levav. So I should not have divided it there as I did. Wish I had some whiteout, but anyway, as long as you know, we'll draw the line here. Again, cha is our masculine second person possessive, heart. Then down here we have and with all. Vav is and. The vet or bet is with. Chal is all. Okay? This is more for canting. When you see this fun little thing here, don't worry about it. You'll see it all the time. Just ignore it and read the words as you would as if it weren't there. Nefesh is soul. So we're going to block off our suffix here because it's a different part of speech. Again, cha is your. So this will really be drilled into you by the end of the Vahavtah. Elohecha, levavcha, nafshecha. It's your soul. And with all me'od, we'll go ahead and put best and your. Okay, so we have the breakdown here. And you shall love it, the Lord, your God, with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your best. Okay? Vahavtah et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha. So, one other thing that I'm going to add in at the ends of these videos as we're going through the Vahavtah is how to sing it. There are at least, and this is a very sparing number, at least 3 different tunes that I personally know of when it comes to how to sing the Vahavtah. It depends on the tradition, whether you're using the canting marks that are delineated in, say, the Chumash versus just a tradition within your synagogue or what you're encountering. It does change and vary, not too much, but know that the differences are there. If you run into a tune that you're thinking, that doesn't sound familiar to me, it's because there are many different schools of thought as to which one is quote-unquote correct. So what I'll sing here is the one that I know. If you happen to hear a different one, just, they're not right, they're not wrong. Just know that you can learn several different traditions. So, I'll sing it slowly. Vahavtah et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha. I'll sing it one more time. I just want to point out a couple things you might notice here. If I say uv'chol, it's only because when singing, you don't hold out a consonant sound. So it's easier to add in a little bit of an eh after a sheva in order to make it sound better musically. That's all that's really happening there. So I'll sing it one more time. Vahavtah et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha. Okay? So next week, if I can get these out weekly, we will be going over the next line of the Vahavtah. Here's a little preview of what we're going to be going over and what we'll break down. Until then, go ahead and work on these here. Watch the video as many times as you need to get it in your head. Make your vocab cards, and we'll see you next time.